Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak. We are in the throes of summer by the time you're listening to this episode. We are re-releasing some of our very favorite episodes about the pre-tenure experience as we are in our pre-tenure program enrollment period. Yes, Amplify is enrolling for our only offering in 2022, which will run from September 2022 to February 2023. We would love for you to apply and enroll. And I hope you'll be inspired to do so by listening to this re-release of an episode where we talked to two Amplify grads, Melva and Sylvie. They are just so wonderful. And you're really going to hear in this episode how they were able to turn their pre-tenure experience around and really create something different for themselves pre-tenure, even though they're at Research One universities, even though they are overworked as we all are, they made it feel different for themselves, which is so important. If you want to be our next Amplify success story, I would love for you to go check out our information session. Now, you heard the information session in a previous episode of this podcast. We published the recording of it right here on the podcast. You can go and listen to that, or you can go to kathymazak.com/amplify. We should have that link in the show notes, where you will able to register for our information session on demand. And what that means is that if you put your registration information in there, you'll get immediate access to the recording video of our hour-long information session so that you can get all the details about our Amplify program and decide if it's right for you. If it is, then we encourage you to apply. Enrollment closes on the last day of July, so we already have our cohorts shaping up. So if you want in, we need you to go check out that info session and apply as soon as possible. We can't wait to receive your application. Please enjoy the re-release of this episode interview with two Amplify pre-tenure success stories, Melva and Sylvie. You'll hear all about it right now. I'm so excited to get to talk to you today. Today we have a panel of Amplify members with us to talk about the pre-tenure journey. So let me start by just asking each of you to introduce yourselves with who you are, what you do, and where you are in your pre-tenure journey. So maybe Melva, could you start?
Yeah, hi, my name is Melva Treviño, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of Marine Affairs at the University of Rhode Island. I am a human geographer, and I'm in a very interdisciplinary program. I'm the geographer here, and I am about to start the third year of my tenure track.
Awesome. Thank you. Go ahead, Sylvie.
So I'm Sylvie Huijben. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. I had to count. I'm starting my fourth year, which sounds kind of scary, with a bunch of extensions. So wherever you are in that. And I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I study the evolution of drug resistance and insecticide resistance.
Great. Awesome. All right. I'm so glad to have you both with us today. So I've known each of you for about a year, a little over a year, I think, for Melva. And I met you through our Amplify program. So I would love for you each to tell the listeners how you found out about the program and then why you decided to join it.
I I can't remember how I found you, to be honest, but I think it must have been podcasts, I guess. But I remember at least probably about half a year before I started the Amplify program, I found a podcast, and that was really helping me. And then I was wavering, do I want to start Amplify or not? What's the benefit? Maybe I can do it with just a podcast. Yeah. But then I just realized, like, no, I need to jump in fully and just get immersed. So that's how then I tried to get the money from my department heads, which I got halfway. So he chipped in half of it, which was nice. But yeah, that's how I got started.
Great.
I honestly don't remember, but it must have been like in the fall of 2019. It was somehow someone mentioned the Facebook group.
Okay.
And I found out about the Facebook group and I really liked it. And then I have a colleague here at the University of Rhode Island who, in passing, mentioned that she was just about to start a program for women on the tenure track. And I was like, that sounds a lot like that Facebook group. And I asked her, and it was. And then because she had just enrolled in it, and since Sylvie mentioned the funding, I was able to get funding from my university, partially because my colleague was already pushing for that. And that's how I ended up in the program. So it was just kind of like meant to be, I guess. But I can't recall how I ever found out about the Facebook group. It just sounded like I was like, I should be writing. I should join that group. And then I joined Amplify.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that you both were able to get funding. And I really love, Melva, that you were able, that somebody else at your university had already started to pave the way for you. So
Definitely.
I was so happy, when you joined for that reason, because I'm like, oh, good. That means that, their university is kicking in here. So that's good. Okay. So each of you has achieved amazing things in the last year. So I want to talk about just what you've accomplished and what we might celebrate together here on the podcast, in the last year. So however you want to approach that question, whether you want to talk about, publications or things you've done that, outside of publications, but what are some things that have happened in the last year, your accomplishments?
I think for me, it took a little bit of time. I came to the program and I immediately was like, yeah, this is definitely going to help me, because I didn't get a lot of exposure to the publication process as a PhD student. I got a lot of experience teaching. And I feel like because so much of my time went to that, I was not able to really build those skills that maybe. I also thought that everybody, I was the only person that had graduated without having the publication skills. And then I started to learn that is not true. But I came to the program partially drawn for that reason, because I recognize once you get a PhD, you magically don't develop those skills. They don't come with the degree. You have to actually work on them. So I came to the program with that intention of really developing a writing system and thinking about how that could work for me. So I think that one of the biggest things, aside from accomplishments that I've been able to do the last year, I think the biggest thing for me was I talk about the program a lot to people outside of it, because it really helped me transform how I see myself and how I see the writing process. And I can already developing a system. I know you give us a lot of guidance and the coaches give us a lot of guidance, but it really is so individual and it varies by person and it's so on you. And I just feel like I was able to gain a lot of skills, but really develop something that works for me. And that's something that I think, just looking back to where I was 6 months ago, especially a year ago, because I joined Amplify 14 months ago, I think. But especially even last summer to how I'm approaching writing today, it's a whole different person. So that to me, getting publication, I recently got a paper published and just been working on big projects and learning how to manage multiple things at the same time. Those are all great. But I just honestly do feel like I am a very different person than I was a year ago. And it took a while for me to see that growth in myself. But I definitely when you're able to look back and recognize that, I don't know, I feel like it happened quickly if you really think about it. I feel like I went through a lot of growth, professional growth over the last year, which I don't know if I would have gotten that fast. Maybe I would have gotten there eventually, but not in a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And Sylvie, we were kind of talking about some of this yesterday. So maybe you want to follow up.
Yeah, Melva, you said it so nicely because I completely concur with what you're saying. There's some tangible things that I did over the past year that, are wins, but I think the main win for me is just this mentality shift of any clarity that I have in the work that I'm doing. And I think before starting the program, I was working very hard, and it wasn't like I was necessarily overworked and stressed. But on hindsight, I feel like I must have been, because now there's so much more clarity in what I'm doing rather than having like 20 different projects hanging over your head and trying to move all of them. Now it's more like, okay, I've got a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm first going to work on this. And I know this other project needs to be done, but it'll wait because, I don't have time for it now. And that's okay. So I think just the mentality shift, I think, is my biggest win. And I was telling you yesterday, Kathy, that when I started the program, I was really seeing it a little bit like, okay, this is going to be a year of productivity, right? Like a year that I'm in this program and I'm going to have these wins. Like at the end, I've submitted a grant and I've published these 2 papers. And now I see it so much differently because I was worried that after the program's done, it's basically, the benefit is done. But that's not the case at all. It's more like, I changed the way that I work, and I'm definitely not going to go back to where I was, right? So I think that's the biggest win. It's not about what I did this past year, but more like how it's changing me, hopefully for the rest of my career, right?
Yeah. Melva, what are some things you think you'll like hold on to? Because now it's been a couple months that you've been out of the program. So like, what are some things that you're still doing that are like things that you have changed because of Amplify?
I was actually just talking to my other colleague from URI who is in the program, who also is done. And we were texting yesterday about she's redoing her mission statement. And I was like, you can just go back and do the thing. And I was like, I'm actually going to go back and redo that first video. It's like one of the first ones you do in Amplify, because I want to I have to rethink my mission statement. It's been a while since I touched on it. So, but one of the things that I'm really taking is, well, there's a few but like big ones that come to mind. I think it's how you perceive yourself and how you go about making decisions for yourself, and I guess not feeling bad about them. Like one of the things I really struggled with, and I think that happens a lot to especially very early career people, like the first year here at my postdoc, like just saying yes to a lot of things. Like it just felt like I needed to be saying yes to things because they felt like opportunities were coming and I needed to take them. And then that's how you end up being so overwhelmed, because you just say yes to a lot of things that seem like good ideas. But like Sylvie said, sometimes they're good ideas, they're just not at the right time. And sometimes they sound like good ideas, but they're really not for you. So some of the things that I'm really trying to still, like, again, it's not like I joined the program and I'm like 100% perfect yet. Like I'm still working on it. But some of the things that I really appreciate is like, be more selective of the things that actually feed my soul and my, like, you always talk about being on mission. There was that workshop that we did in January, which was amazing to me at the writing retreat, about values. And that's something that keeps on coming back a lot in other workshops I've been to, like having your values at the center. And I know that's what the whole mission statement's about, but like, those are things that I keep on coming back to, because I think it's just about going through the tenure track with more intention. And that's what I'm trying to do as I move forward. So sometimes life does get in the way, things happen, you get overwhelmed. And then I feel like that derailed Melva is all over the place again. And I just kind of can go back and like, okay, like what were the things I learned and how do I recenter myself and kind of like take a little bit of a break, start over, and then move forward with all the 1,000 things that you have going on. But I think that mentality of like reshifting in the moment, like taking that time to rethink and then reapproach it rather than just keep going and going and going and going, because that is what I was doing for the first couple of years here.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about intention, right? It's like, we're doing it. There's still going to be moments, like every semester has this cycle to it that comes to a head, kind of like if you're on like a 15-week semester, by the time you're at week 10, you're kind of like, like, let me just hold on to week 15. And that can continue to happen. But it's like, how do you handle it? How do you respond to it? Like, maybe you're never going to like completely prevent those times where things just seem to like pile on. But like you said, Melba, it's like, how do you intentionally go about recovering from those things instead of what happens to a lot of people, which is that they kind of build and build and build and you burn out.
Yes.
So
I was there. I did not know what burnout was until like maybe the end of my first year here as assistant professor. Like I heard of it, but I didn't experience it before, like legitimate burnout where you are burnt out and absolutely can't do anything. Like you do like one thing and need a nap.
Yep.
That was really weird. I experienced that. So like those were like big red flags to me that I was like, this is not sustainable. Like this is not how I can keep going. And I think when we're PhD students, it feels like you can do that because you kind of do it, but then like you get done and like, what are you going to start like another like maybe 6-year process until you get tenure? Like it can't happen like that. You can't just kind of keep going with the same, maybe whatever you did through PhD, you clearly got through and you had the skills to get through it.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you can just kind of bring that mentality to this type of job. It just doesn't translate well.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. Sylvie, what are some things that you're going to bring out from your year in Amplify into the next few years?
Right. There's a whole long list of things. I first wanted to second what Melva was saying. One of the things that I noticed with this too is the ease of like having a structure that's easy when you fall off the wagon, which happens many times over the year. I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm there. Like I'm not there at all. I think it's a continuous work in progress all the time, right?
Yeah.
But how easy it is to sort of like recognize the feeling that you have fallen off the wagon and get back on it. Because before I started this program, I was always interested in trying new systems, right? And I read a book about to-do lists or whatever, but I would be very excited about it for 1 week, 2 weeks, and then I slowly would fall off the wagon. And I think what's happened to me in this program is that I just have like the tools that if I start to feel more frazzled, it's like, okay, now I know what to do. I just need to do my activities download and just sit down. What is it that I'm all doing? And then what can I push back for later? So I think that's one thing, just having like the big wide set of skills and tools. But the main thing that for me was, I guess, an epiphany that I know I will continue is just this notion that not all hours are created equal. And I never thought about that before. I always thought that I have a week and I need to do my work. So if someone would ask me for a meeting, I would just look in my calendar where I don't have any meetings, and that would be my availability. And it never occurred to me that I could put in like, writing as sort of like an activity that I can't schedule meetings in.
Yeah.
And I have to say that probably was a lot easier this past year because we were all working from home. So it wasn't that you were saying, oh, I can't do this, but everybody sees you sitting in your office.
Right.
So in a way that was easier. So I'm curious how that's going to go. Well, I just need to keep those boundaries basically.
Right.
But I do think it was easier to practice with those boundaries while working from home.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the observation that you have different quality hours and that your work has different quality levels too, so that you put that like high quality work and high quality hours and low quality work and low quality hours.
Yeah.
And then designing this ideal week. I think that was for me that had the major impact on me.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Great. So I know that people who are listening are going to want to hear, for better or for worse, like specific things you published in the last year. So maybe you could compare this last year to the year before in terms of like stuff you were able to get out into the world. And dear listener, do not compare yourself. We're just trying to give you a sense of what, like I think it was Melva who mentioned like you can do things faster, or like with coaching and with programs, what you get is like facilitated speed, really. Like you learn things. It could take you, like Sylvie said, I could have learned a lot of stuff from the podcast. But what you get in a program, right, is that you get like structure that helps you go faster. So maybe Sylvie, what are some things that you got out into the world this year that maybe you were not getting out into the world before?
Right. Well, my main thing that I'm very proud of is that I submitted my NSF career and I got the NSF career awarded. And I know, very excited. And I know, well, you can never know, right? There's no parallel universe, but I just know that this program had so much to do with that. And it was the right timing. We're in the pandemic. I was at home taking care of 2 little kids that needed to be homeschooled, right? So it was a destiny for I was doubting whether I should even be trying to write this grant. And then I started the Amplify program. It's like, okay, I'm just going to, again, use those high quality hours. And that would be the time that the kids, they would have their own activities that they're old enough that they were able to be by themselves for those couple of hours. So just really spending that time and spending that focused time and having a plan that really helped me getting that out of the door, and not just out of the door, but when I submitted it, it was the first time that I submitted a grant that I thought, it's done, right? Like there's always things that you can do, but usually for me, it was like a frazzled race to the finish line. It's like, okay, well, deadline's here, it needs to be submitted. And I wish I had another week to perfect it.
Right.
But I kind of felt like it was done. And that to me was the win. And that's what I always told myself, like, my goal is to just submit the grant and not necessarily getting it because it's out of my control anyway. And it's such a lottery system at the same time too. Sure. So that was one of my main wins. And then the other major win, like tangible thing that I did, was I had this massive project that was hanging over me for years that I needed to finish. And it wasn't necessarily writing, but it was a lot of data analysis that just got me stuck for the longest time. And I needed high quality hours to work on that because I was trying to do it in the evening hours and just getting stuck. So being able to get that to the point, it's still not finished, but it's at the point where I could have like a first draft with major things sent to my co-authors. That was actually the biggest win of all because I didn't realize how much was hanging over my head. Like whatever I was working on, I was always thinking, but I should really be working on this one. It was like my major guilt project.
Yeah.
And getting a guilt project out of the way was such a sense of relief. It's still not out of the way because actually I'm working on it now.
Right.
But it's just getting it unstuck. That was like a major win.
Awesome.
And then I had a paper that just is in second time revision. So that was another. Yeah. So I guess 3 like very tangible big things that got out of the way.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Melva, how was last year for you?
I feel like and that's one of the things that Amplify, if I only think of my productivity as like publications, then I would feel really bad about myself because that's not what, it's kind of what Sylvie was saying about timing. This year was maybe not the biggest on publications, but if I look at everything I did, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should have not been doing these other things, or maybe this was just the time to be working on these other things, but I'll just kind of go over some of them. But I guess the biggest one is that I did get a paper published that went through like submission, revisions and revisions. And then like it just got published last month through like the year of the program. So that paper was like the big paper that I was working on. But I started working on a second paper that I like probably will submit this weekend. Like I'm so close. It's one of those things that you're like, I need to write that letter now. Like I'm just dragging it. I get scared. I'm still working on it. So I guess that second paper also was completely a project I started working on literally at the same time when I started Amplify. So these two papers were like the biggest writing projects I had. But I also was able to work on 2 grants, one big one and one small. We did not get the big one, but I got the small grant. And those obviously take time and it's part of the writing. I started 2 new research projects, which I'm really excited about. And it's like kind of managing it all. But also I taught a very large class in the fall, like large intro class in my department that was very challenging because it was a pandemic and it was like 100 students, remote teaching. So, I feel like if anything, I think the biggest thing was like learning how to balance all these different things that were like all these really big moving parts. And one of the things I did notice, though, is like the first paper that I was working on that just got published, it just took me so much longer to get through that. But then when I look at the progress of the second paper, it's like not half the amount of time that it took me to get there, but maybe 3/4. So like it still feels like I just feel so slow about it. But like even a friend of mine, like one of my closest friends was like, yeah, but I noticed it's a lot faster. Like, and that's part of it, that like, it will be a lot faster the next time. I just feel like those are like the things that I think like that goes again with the idea of like me developing stronger writing systems and feeling like what Sylvie said earlier was really important too, like prioritizing the writing time. And one of the things I've noticed is like, I can recognize when my writing goes on the back burner, which I didn't before. doesn't mean I'm always good about bringing it to the front burner.
Sure.
But I recognize that. And I think that when you don't know that something's happening, how are you going to fix it? So for me, like, I started to immediately start to recognize, like, oh, I'm engaging in that behavior again. And you recognize it. You might not have the time to fix it at that moment, but at least you recognize it, versus when you're completely unaware and just moving by, like going. I think that's when it's really scary, because you're not even aware of what you're doing. So those were like, I feel like I was able to kind of work on, like, yes, teaching, research, and the writing. And I am involved in maybe too much service too. I'm working on saying no to things. As you know, that's hard for me, Kathy.
Yes, I know.
It's so hard. I'm like, but why do I have to say no? I can try to do them all. No, I can't. But I think that one of the biggest things for me was like learning kind of how to balance those things and being okay with, like, the fall. I recognize this is not going to be a big writing time. It's a big teaching semester, and I'm going to have to be okay with it. Then the spring shifted to my big writing and research semester. And just like, I think also recognizing that there are like these ebbs and flows that you have to be okay with is really important, because if you try to plan every week for the whole academic year to be equal or whatever matches to your contract, like, that is just not going to happen. That is not realistic. You can't plan a week like that. You can plan a year, like, where you try to be more balanced, maybe a 2-year, 3-year. And I think that's some of the things that I definitely will be walking away with. Like, it's a long-term thing. It's like planning for the years ahead, which before to me seemed almost impossible to think that far in advance of like what my life will look like in 2, 3, 4 years in this career.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. It's so intentional too, what you mentioned before about intentionality. Like, everything you said just really sounds like, now I can recognize things. Now I can intentionally decide this semester is the heavy teaching, and this semester it's like so much more, you're so much more in control, or at least
or attempting to be
in control. It's like a little, but also, like, let me just say, Melva, you sound more powerful. You sound more powerful than when I first met you. And I think that that's amazing.
I was really overwhelmed when I first met you.
Well,
it was so clear. You could just see it in my face, hear it in my voice. It was so sad.
Oh, but also, you're not alone. I'm sure that people listening are going to be like, oh yeah, that really is me right now. So that's important too, I think.
Oh, it's such a beautiful part of the program to find out that you're not alone, and that it's like, oh, we're all going through this. It's not just me. And like, I think that that's one of the most amazing parts, was the community that you develop it through the program. And I think that's how you gain more of that self-acceptance, right? Because you recognize like, oh, it's not me, it's the system that's making me feel like that. And that's why all these people I'm meeting in this program are having very similar experiences. Like, it's not a coincidence that some of us are in like completely different parts of the world, or some in like very different types of universities, right? Different types of careers, yet we share so much in terms of what we're experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. Sylvie, what was your favorite part of the program?
I would say community too, actually. Mm-hmm. Having those meetings every other week was sort of like a highlight to, see everyone again. And, you build up a sense of community and friendship with people. And also momentum, actually. I really embrace the whole momentum program, and I will continue with that in the coming year too, because it helps me a lot. I noticed that I just need that community to continue to feel the energy, to continue to write. Because sometimes I try to do it on my own, but it makes it more real. If I write in the chat window, oh, I'm going to write this paragraph this coming hour, then it seems more like a commitment than when I just write it down on my own sheet, for instance. And for me personally, that really helped. And I know that's different for everyone. And I think that's what Melva was saying in the beginning too. Like, it's such an individualized program, right? Some things work for some people and some don't work for other people. So just having this sense of community, I think that's what I really liked about it. And just, having these every other week meetings, somebody else would say something that you're like, oh yeah, I'm struggling with that. Or they have solutions. I'm like, oh, I never thought about that even, but that's something that I could try. So just hearing other people going through, the exact same process and how they're handling it, even if they're working on something very different, like writing a book. Like, I don't have to write a book, and I probably will never write a book, nor do I want to. But just the struggle of handling such a big project is very similar as handling a very big lab project, for instance, right? It has different components and they all need to come together. So yeah, I learned a lot about, I guess, more like a bird's eye view of what you need to do and what you can get stuck on.
Yeah. Okay. My last question for each of you is, who would you recommend Amplify to and why?
Everybody.
Everybody. All the people.
Well, I would recommend it to the person who was like me, like just being frazzled, right? So knowing that you have all these things to do, and you kind of, the way I always saw it was, you're working very reactively. Like something comes on your desk and that's what you're working on. And then somebody tells you in your email, like, hey, we're still waiting on comments on this, and we're still waiting on, this part because you're a co-author and now you need to do it. So I would just put out fires left and right, and things would get done, but at the cost of, the gray hairs on my head, right? So it just wasn't a healthy way of going about it, and it wasn't a productive way. So I guess I would recommend it to the assistant professor who doesn't feel like they're on top of their things, which is everybody.
Right. Right. So back to your first answer, everybody. Okay. Thank you so much, Sylvie. Melva, who would you recommend this program to and why?
I feel like, obviously for someone like me, it was very helpful. And I guess by that, I mean, I am the only person in my family to be in academia or have I was the first person to get an advanced degree. And now my little brother's doing it, for example, but he's getting a master's. But for me, I felt very completely lost about what this all meant. And the program, like Sylvie was saying, I learned a lot from Kathy and the coaches, but I learned a lot from the other people in the program, a lot. And especially for me, those writing retreats, those sessions, some of them were so impactful because I learned so much from other people's experiences. So I would say, obviously, for someone who is completely feeling lost and overwhelmed, because that was me. I'm not saying I'm on top of it, but you can recognize it. I think when people talk to me, not even people from Amplify, but people talk to me, they're like, you seem better. I'm like, I am better. But I also want to say that I don't think this program is just for people who are quote unquote struggling. I don't think that, because there's a lot of benefit. And, for me, that was me and that helped me. But there are people I've met in the program that I'm like, why are you here? You're amazing. You meet them and you're like, you're not struggling. What are you doing here? I don't know. But obviously they still are getting so much out of it. That's why they're in the program. But I think everyone's at different levels. So there's maybe this assumption that you have to be so frazzled and overwhelmed that you can't handle it, which kind of is where I was to be in the program. But I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people can benefit from it. And I'm really grateful that I started it so early. I did it halfway first into the second year of my tenure track. I think I did it pretty early on, and I'm grateful for that, because I will never forget this person in one of our workshops in the writing retreat. I think that they were in the Elevate. Yeah, there's this woman in the Elevate program. So they're advanced career women. And she was saying something about all the stuff that we're learning. I wish I'd got, she was kind of saying she was grateful for learning it, but also kind of regretful that she didn't learn this earlier on.
Yeah.
The way she said it made me tear up a bit, because I could just see that she was being so honest about it. And I was like, well, I'm grateful that I'm here right now in the second year of my tenure track, because I do think that there's a lot that you learn from one another and from the program that just stays with you. And it's not just about I published all these papers. It's I changed how I see myself. I changed my mindset. I see how I changed this job. I see how I prioritize things in my life. Those are all things that I think people can get there, but it really kind of would take a lot of time to do it on your own, if you can get there on your own. That's why I'm saying, yes, if you're the typical person who's struggling and is completely confused, yes, this program will definitely help you. But I also think if you are just trying to figure out alternative ways of being in academia, because you will find out that it's not everything you thought it would be. I think that the program, it teaches you about more than just developing a good writing system and management. It teaches you a lot of more than that. And I think that that's the things that I'm holding on to the most, because that's where I see my growth as a person. And then everything else just comes later, That's how I feel.
Yeah. Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I would add one category of people that are probably doing fine, but they feel like, they work in the evenings and the weekends too. But they, if it's your choice, and obviously anybody should, work if that's what makes them happy. But, if you want to get your life back a little bit, I think that's what this program taught me a lot too. And even before, I was very adamant that I wouldn't want to work in the weekends, right? Unless a deadline is coming up. But this program really gave me the tools to do that very successfully without the guilt, right? Actually, with the pride, like, yes, I am not working in the weekends because I shouldn't.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here today and for answering all my questions, for telling the people about your experiences. I'm just so glad, as I always say, I'm just so glad the interwebs brought us together, and that we were able to find each other and have this experience together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Kathy.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.